I never meant to end her life. But the truth is, when the night ended, I wasn't sure if it was really me or something else. It began like any other dreary evening. The rain hammered against my windshield as I drove toward my mother's office. She'd called me just an hour before, her voice trembling, insisting that I come immediately. She wouldn't tell me why. "Just get here," she said, her voice low and frantic. "And don't tell anyone you're coming." That was odd. My mother never sounded like that. She was the kind of woman who could face down a hurricane and still get her paperwork done. But tonight, something was wrong. When I pulled into the empty parking lot, the building stood like a dark monolith against the stormy sky. The 13th floor, her floor, was dim except for one flickering light in her office window. It seemed like it was pulsing, almost alive. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, staring up at the building. Something in my gut told me to turn around and leave, but I couldn't. My mother needed me. I made my way inside. The elevator creaked as it ascended, each floor feeling like an eternity. My own warped reflection stared back at me in the polished doors. But something was off. For a split second, I thought I saw it smile, though I wasn't smiling at all. When the doors opened, the hallway was darker than it should have been. The overhead lights flickered sporadically, and the air was thick with an odd, metallic smell. I passed rows of empty cubicles, their computer screens dark. As I approached her office door, I saw her silhouette through the frosted glass. But she wasn't sitting at her desk. She was standing perfectly still, her back to the door. "Mom," I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the empty space. She didn't answer. When I stepped inside, she finally turned around. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Close the door," she whispered. I did as she asked, and when I turned back, she was right in front of me. I flinched. She grabbed my arm, her fingers cold as ice, and hissed, They know what you are. What I am." I stammered, trying to pull away, but her grip was unnaturally strong. "You don't remember, do you?" she said, her voice trembling. "I've kept you safe all these years. I've kept them at bay, but it's starting to slip. I can't hold it back anymore." I had no idea what she was talking about. Her words were frantic, disjointed, and filled with a desperation I'd never heard before. "Mom, you're scaring me," I said, stepping back. "You should be scared," she snapped. "You should be terrified." Before I could respond, the lights went out completely, plunging the office into darkness. "Stay here," she whispered, though I could barely see her face anymore. She moved toward her desk, rummaging through the drawers. I heard her muttering under her breath, words that didn't make sense, like a prayer in a language I didn't recognize. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper, coming from somewhere in the room. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't mine. It was everywhere. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and stretch, as if something was moving within them. I turned toward the door, but it was gone. The office walls were wrong, twisting, breathing like they were alive. My mother screamed. I spun around and saw her standing by the desk, clutching something in her hand, a knife. Her eyes were wild, filled with fear, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking behind me. "Don't let it take you," she sobbed. Her scream still echoes in my head, shrill and raw, cutting through the oppressive darkness. I froze, my heart hammering, but my mother didn't. She moved faster than I thought she could, her face twisted with a fear that seemed too big to be directed at me. The blade glinted faintly as she lunged. "Mom, stop!" I shouted, barely dodging her. The knife grazed my arm, the sting sharp and hot. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's not you I'm trying to kill, it's it." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't have time to think. She came at me again, the knife clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. I grabbed her wrist, and we struggled, the sound of her ragged breathing mixing with the whispers that filled the room. They were louder now, circling us, crawling into my ears, into my mind. "She's lying," the voice hissed. It sounded like my own, but lower, darker, and brimming with malice. "No!" she screamed, her face inches from mine. "Don't listen to it. Fight it." Something shifted then. Her voice faded, drowned out by the incessant whispers, which became a guttural chant. My grip on her wrist tightened. I saw the terror in her eyes, and for the first time, it wasn't directed at the shadows. It was at me. The whispers weren't just in my head anymore. They were alive, weaving through the air like unseen tendrils, feeding me their rage, their hatred, their hunger. I didn't realize I'd reached for the letter opener until I felt its weight in my hand. Time slowed as I raised it. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, or maybe I refused to hear. The blade drove into her chest, sinking deep. The sound was wet and unnatural, followed by her sharp gasp. I stood there, holding the letter opener, trembling, as her blood poured over my hand. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide with shock and something else. Not hatred, not even pain. It was pity. Her lips moved again, barely a whisper. "It's not me you should fear, it's you." I stumbled back, dropping the letter opener. My breath came in shallow, panicked gulps as I looked at her lifeless body. Blood seeped across the floor, thick and black in the dim light, forming strange, intricate patterns that writhed and shifted like living things. The whispers grew louder, deafening, and the room changed. The walls groaned and warped, bending as though made of flesh. The floor under my feet pulsed, warm and wet like I was standing on something alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling and slithering toward me. "Mom!" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Mom, I didn't mean to." Then I heard it, laughter. It wasn't mine, but it came from somewhere deep inside me. It bubbled up like bile, harsh and mocking. My reflection in the glass cabinet shifted, and I froze. It was me, but it wasn't. The figure in the glass was twisted, grotesque. Its eyes were black voids, empty and endless, and its grin stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face like a wound. "You always knew," it said, its voice like splintering wood. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. You're not real." "Oh, but I am," it whispered, stepping closer, though its body never left the glass. "I've always been here, watching, waiting." The blood on the floor began to move, spiraling toward me in impossible patterns, rising like smoke. The shadows wrapped around my ankles, cold and slick, pulling me down. "What are you?" I screamed, clawing at the floor. Its grin widened. "I'm you, the real you, the part she tried to hide, the part she feared." Memories flooded my mind, flashes of things I'd buried deep, the strange, violent urges I'd had as a child, the nightmares of dark places and endless screaming, the times I'd blacked out and woken up somewhere else, with no memory of how I got there. I realized then that my mother had been right. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect me, protect the world, from me, but it was too late. "You feel it, don't you?" the figure in the glass said. "The power, the hunger. You don't need her anymore. You never did." The room around me began to collapse, the walls crumbling into darkness. I was falling, or maybe the world was falling away from me. My mother's voice echoed faintly in the void. "Don't let it take you. Don't let it win." But I was tired of fighting. The figure stepped out of the glass, towering over me. It reached out, its hand merging with mine, and I felt a surge of cold, electric power. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. And in that silence, I smiled. Not because I wanted to, because it wanted me to. People ask me why I avoid my mother's grave. I tell them I don't deserve to visit her. The truth is, she's not there. She's here, with me, every night, in the mirror, watching me, waiting for the day I lose control again. And when I do, it won't just be her blood on my hands.